The Trial for Murder by Charles Dickens. I have always noticed a prevalent want of courage, even among persons of superior intelligence and culture, as to imparting their own psychic experiences when those have been of spectral illusion. In what I am going to relate, I have no intention of setting up, opposing, or supporting any theory whatever. I had never before had any similar experience, nor have I ever had a similar experience since. It does not signify how many years ago, or how few, a certain murder was committed in England which attracted great attention. We hear more than enough of murderers as they rise in succession to their atrocious eminence, and I would bury the memory of this particular brute. When the murder was first discovered, no suspicion fell on the man who was afterwards brought to trial. It is essential that this fact be remembered. Unfolding at breakfast my morning paper, containing the account of that first discovery, I found it to be deeply interesting, and I read it with close attention. The discovery had been made in a bedroom, and when I laid down the paper, I was aware of a flow, I don't know what to call it, in which I seemed to see that bedroom passing through my room. Though almost instantaneous in its passing, it was perfectly clear, so clear that I distinctly, and with a sense of relief, observed the absence of the dead body from the bed. It was in no romantic place that I had this curious sensation, but in chambers in Piccadilly. I was in my easy chair, and the sensation was accompanied with a peculiar shiver which started the chair from its position. I went to one of the windows to refresh my eyes with the moving objects in the road below. The wind was high. As I looked out, it brought down from the park a quantity of fallen leaves, which a gust took and whirled into a spiral pillar. As the pillar fell and the leaves dispersed, I saw two men on the opposite side of the way. They were one behind the other. The foremost man often looked back over his shoulder. The second man followed him, with his right hand menacingly raised. In passing before my windows, both men stared up at me. I saw their two faces very distinctly, and I knew that I could recognize them anywhere. Not that I had consciously noticed anything very remarkable in either face, except that the man who went first had an unusually lowering appearance, and that the face of the man who followed him was of the colour of impure wax. As the circumstances of the murder gradually unravelling took stronger possession of the public mind, I kept them away from mine by knowing as little about them as was possible. But I knew that a verdict of wilful murder had been found against the suspected murderer, and that he had been committed to Newgate for trial. I was standing in my bedroom late one night, facing towards the closed door of my dressing-room. I saw it open, and a man look in who very earnestly beckoned to me. That man was the man who had gone second of the two along Piccadilly, and whose face was the colour of impure wax. The figure drew back and closed the door. With no longer pause than was made by my crossing the bedroom, I opened the dressing-room door and looked in. I felt no inward expectation of seeing the figure in the dressing-room, and I did not see it there. Reflecting on it, I was absolutely certain that I had never seen that face before except on the one occasion in Piccadilly. At daylight I fell into a heavy sleep, from which I was awakened by my servant John Derrick coming to my bedside with a paper in his hand. It was a summons to me to serve upon a jury at the forthcoming sessions of the Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey. For a day or two I was undecided whether to respond to this call or take no notice of it. Ultimately I decided, as a break in the monotony of my life, that I would go. The appointed morning was a raw morning in the month of November. I took my seat in the place appropriated to jurors in waiting, Soon afterwards the judges, 2 in number, entered and took their seats. The buzz in the court was awfully hushed. The direction was given to put the murderer to the bar. He appeared, and in that same instant I recognized in him the first of the 2 men who had gone down Piccadilly. If my name had been called then, I doubt if I could have answered to it audibly. But it was called about 6th or 8th in the panel, and I was by that time able to say, "Here." Now observe. As I stepped into the box, the prisoner, who had been looking on attentively, but with no sign of concern, became violently agitated and beckoned to his attorney. The prisoner's wish to challenge me was so manifest that it occasioned a pause, during which the attorney whispered with his client and shook his head. I afterwards had it from that gentleman that the prisoner's first affrighted words to him were, "At all hazards, challenge that man," but that as he would give no reason for it, and admitted that he had not even known my name until he heard it called and I appeared, it was not done. I was chosen foreman of the jury. On the second morning of the trial, after evidence had been taken for 2 hours, happening to cast my eyes over my brother jurymen, I found an inexplicable difficulty in counting them. I counted them several times, yet always with the same difficulty. In short, I made them 1 too many. I touched the brother juryman whose place was next me, and I whispered to him, "Oblige me by counting us." He looked surprised by the request, but turned his head and counted. "Why," says he suddenly, "we're 30... But no, it's not possible. No, we are 12. According to my counting that day, we were always right in detail, but in the gross we were always 1 too many. There was no appearance, no figure to account for it, but I had now an inward foreshadowing of the figure that was surely coming. The jury were housed at the London Tavern. We all slept in one large room, and we were constantly under the eye of the officer sworn to hold us in safe keeping. His name was Mr. Harker. When we turned into our 12 beds at night, Mr. Harker's bed was drawn across the door. On the night of the second day, not being disposed to lie down, and seeing Mr. Harker sitting on his bed, I went and sat beside him and offered him a pinch of snuff. As Mr. Harker's hand touched mine in taking it from my box, a peculiar shiver crossed him, and he said, "Who is this?" Following Mr. Harker's eyes, and looking along the room, I saw again the figure I expected, the second of the 2 men who had gone down Piccadilly. I rose and advanced a few steps, then stopped, and looked round at Mr. Harker. He was quite unconcerned, laughed, and said in a pleasant way, "I thought for a moment we had a 13th juryman without a bed. But I see it is the moonlight." Making no revelation to Mr. Harker, I watched what the figure did. It stood for a few moments by the bedside of each of my 11 brother jurymen. It seemed from the action of the head merely to look down pensively at each recumbent figure. It took no notice of me or of my bed, which was that nearest to Mr. Harker's. It seemed to go out where the moonlight came in, through a high window, as by an aerial flight of stairs. Next morning, at breakfast, it appeared that everybody present had dreamed of the murdered man last night, except myself and Mr. Harker. I now felt as convinced that the second man who had gone down Piccadilly was the murdered man. Generally, when we were shut up together in Mr. Harker's custody, we had from the first naturally discussed the day's proceedings. On the 5th day, the case for the prosecution being closed, our discussion was more animated and serious. Among our number was a vestryman, the densest idiot I have ever seen at large, who met the plainest evidence with the most preposterous objections, and who was sided with by 2 flabby parochial parasites. When these mischievous blockheads were at their loudest, which was towards midnight, I again saw the murdered man. He stood grimly behind them, beckoning to me. On my going towards them and striking into the conversation, he immediately retired. Whenever a knot of my brother jurymen laid their heads together, and whenever their comparison of notes was going against him, he would solemnly beckon to me. The figure was now in court continually, and it never there addressed itself to me, but always to the person who was speaking at the time. For instance, the throat of the murdered man had been cut straight across. In the opening speech for the defence, it was suggested that the deceased might have cut his own throat. At that very moment, the figure, with its throat in the dreadful condition referred to, stood at the speaker's elbow, motioning across and across its windpipe, now with the right hand, now with the left, vigorously suggesting to the speaker himself the impossibility of such a wound having been self-inflicted. So with the venerable sagacious judge who conducted the trial. When the case was over, and he settled himself and his papers to sum up, the murdered man, entering by the judge's door, advanced to his lordship's desk and looked eagerly over his shoulder at the pages of his notes which he was turning. A change came over his lordship's face. His hand stopped. The peculiar shiver that I knew so well passed over him. He faltered. "Excuse me, gentlemen, for a few moments. I am somewhat oppressed by the vitiated air," and did not recover until he had drunk a glass of water. We retired to consider at 7 minutes before 10 at night. At length we prevailed, and finally the jury returned into court at 10 minutes past 12. The murdered man stood directly opposite the jury box. As I took my place, his eyes rested on me. He seemed satisfied, and slowly shook a great grey veil which he carried on his arm for the first time over his head and whole form. As I gave in our verdict, "Guilty," the veil collapsed, all was gone, and his place was empty. The murderer, being asked by the judge whether he had anything to say before sentence of death should be passed upon him, indistinctly muttered something which was described in the leading newspapers of the following day as a few rambling, incoherent, and half-audible words. The remarkable declaration that he really made was this: "My lord, I knew I was a doomed man when the foreman of my jury came into the box. My lord, I knew he would never let me off, because, before I was taken, he somehow got to my bedside in the night, woke me, and put a rope round my neck." Chips, A Bargain with the Devil, by Charles Dickens. There was once a shipwright, and he wrought in a government yard, and his name was Chips. And his father's name before him was Chips. And his father's name before him was Chips. And they were all Chipses. And Chips the father had sold himself to the devil for an iron pot and a bushel of tenpenny nails and 1/2 ton of copper and a rat that could speak. And Chips the grandfather had sold himself to the devil for an iron pot and a bushel of tenpenny nails and 1/2 ton of copper and a rat that could speak. And Chips the great-grandfather had disposed of himself in the same direction on the same terms, and the bargain had run in the family for a long, long time. So, one day, when young Chips was at work in the dock slip all alone, down in the dark hold of an old 74 that was hailed up for repairs, the devil presented himself and remarked, "A lemon has pips, and a yard has ships, and I'll have Chips. I don't know why, but this fact of the devil's expressing himself in rhyme was peculiarly trying to me. Chips looked up when he heard the words, and there he saw the devil with saucer eyes that squinted on a terrible great scale, and that struck out sparks of blue fire continually. And whenever he winked his eyes, showers of blue sparks came out, and his eyelashes made a clattering like flints and steels striking lights. And hanging over one of his arms by the handle was an iron pot, and under that arm was a bushel of tenpenny nails, and under his other arm was 1/2 ton of copper, and sitting on one of his shoulders was a rat that could speak. So the devil said again, "A lemon has pips, and a yard has ships, and I'll have chips." The invariable effect of this alarming tautology on the part of the evil spirit was to deprive me of my senses for some moments. So Chips answered never a word, but went on with his work. "What are you doing, Chips?" said the rat that could speak. "I'm putting in new planks where you and your gang have eaten old away," said Chips. "But we'll eat them too," said the rat that could speak, "and we'll let in the water and drown the crew, and we'll eat them too." Chips, being only a shipwright and not a man-of-war's man, said, "You're welcome to it." But he couldn't keep his eyes off the 1/2 ton of copper or the bushel of tenpenny nails, for nails and copper are a shipwright's sweethearts, and shipwrights will run away with them whenever they can. So the devil said, "I see what you're looking at, Chips. You'd better strike the bargain. You know the terms. Your father before you was well acquainted with them, and so were your grandfather and great-grandfather before him." Says Chips, "I like the copper and I like the nails, and I don't mind the pot, but I don't like the rat." Says the devil fiercely, "You can't have the metal without him, and he's a curiosity. I'm going." Chips, afraid of losing the 1/2 ton of copper and the bushel of nails, then said, "Oh, give us hold." So he got the copper and the nails and the pot and the rat that could speak, and the devil vanished. Chips sold the copper, and he sold the nails, and he would have sold the pot, but whenever he offered it for sale, the rat was in it, and the dealers dropped it and would have nothing to say to the bargain. So Chips resolved to kill the rat. And, being at work in the yard one day, with a great kettle of hot pitch on one side of him, and the iron pot with the rat in it on the other, he turned the scalding pitch into the pot and filled it full. Then he kept his eye upon it till it cooled and hardened, and then he let it stand for 20 days, and then he heated the pitch again and turned it back into the kettle, and then he sank the pot in water for 20 days more, and then he got the smelters to put it in the furnace for 20 days more, and then they gave it him out red hot, and looking like red hot glass instead of iron. Yet there was the rat in it, just the same as ever, and the moment it caught his eye, it said with a jeer, "A lemon has pips, and a yard has ships, and I'll have chips." For this refrain I had waited since its last appearance with inexpressible horror, which now culminated. Chips now felt certain in his own mind that the rat would stick to him, and the rat, answering his thought, said, "I will, like pitch." Now, as the rat leapt out of the pot when it had spoken and made off, Chips began to hope that it wouldn't keep its word. But a terrible thing happened next day. For when dinner-time came, and the dock bell rang to strike work, he put his rule into the long pocket at the side of his trousers, and there he found a rat, not that rat, but another rat. And in his hat he found another, and in his pocket-handkerchief another, and in the sleeves of his coat, when he pulled it on to go to dinner, 2 more. And from that time he found himself so frightfully intimate with all the rats in the yard that they climbed up his legs when he was at work and sat on his tools while he used them, and they could all speak to one another, and he understood what they said. And they got into his lodging and into his bed and into his teapot and into his beer and into his boots, and he was going to be married to a corn chandler's daughter, and when he gave her a workbox he had himself made for her, a rat jumped out of it, and when he put his arm round her waist, a rat clung about her, so the marriage was broken off, though the banns were already twice put up, which the parish clerk well remembers, for as he handed the book to the clergyman for the second time of asking, a large fat rat ran over the leaf. By this time a special cascade of rats was rolling down my back, and the whole of my small listening person was overrun with them. At intervals ever since, I have been morbidly afraid of my own pocket, lest my exploring hand should find a specimen or two of those vermin in it. You may believe that all this was very terrible to Chips, but even all this was not the worst. He knew besides what the rats were doing, wherever they were, so sometimes he would cry aloud when he was at his club at night, "Oh, keep the rats out of the convicts' burying ground, don't let them do that," or "There's one of them at the cheese downstairs," or "There's two of them smelling at the baby in the garret," or other things of that sort. And at last he was voted mad, and lost his work in the yard, and could get no other work. But King George wanted men, so before very long he got pressed for a sailor. And so he was taken off in a boat one evening to his ship, lying at Spithead ready to sail. And so the first thing he made out in her as he got near her was the figurehead of the old 74, where he had seen the devil. She was called the Argonaut, and they rode right under the bowsprit, where the figurehead of the Argonaut, with a sheepskin in his hand and a blue gown on, was looking out to sea. And sitting, staring on his forehead, was the rat who could speak, and his exact words were these: "Chips ahoy, old boy, we've pretty well eat them too, and we'll drown the crew, and we'll eat them too." Here I always become exceedingly faint, and would have asked for water, but that I was speechless. The ship was bound for the Indies, and if you don't know where that is, you ought to it, and angels will never love you. Here I felt myself an outcast from a future state. The ship set sail that very night, and she sailed and sailed and sailed. Chips's feelings were dreadful. Nothing ever equalled his terrors. No wonder. At last, one day, he asked leave to speak to the Admiral. The Admiral give leave. Chips went down on his knees in the great state cabin. "Your Honour, unless your Honour without a moment's loss of time makes sail for the nearest shore, this is a doomed ship, and her name is the Coffin." "Young man, your words are a madman's words." "Your Honour, no, they are nibbling us away." "They?" "Your Honour, them dreadful rats. Dust and hollowness where solid oak ought to be. Rats nibbling a grave for every man on board. Oh, does your Honour love your lady and your pretty children?" "Yes, my man, to be sure." "Then for God's sake make for the nearest shore, for at this present moment the rats are all stopping in their work, and are all looking straight towards you with bare teeth, and are all saying to one another that you shall never, 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 never see your lady and your children more." "My poor fellow, you're a case for the doctor. Sentry, take care of this man." So he was bled, and he was blistered, and he was this and that for 6 whole days and nights. So then again he asked leave to speak to the Admiral. The Admiral give leave. He went down on his knees in the great state cabin. "Now, Admiral, you must die. You took no warning, you must die. The rats are never wrong in their calculations, and they make out that they'll be through at 12 tonight. So you must die, with me, and all the rest." And so At 12 o'clock there was a great leak reported in the ship, and a torrent of water rushed in, and nothing could stop it, and they all went down, every living soul. And what the rats, being water rats, left of Chips, at last floated to shore, and sitting on him was an immense overgrown rat, laughing, that dived when the corpse touched the beach, and never came up. And there was a deal of seaweed on the remains, and if you get 13 bits of seaweed, and dry them, and burn them in the fire, they will go off like in these 13 words, as plain can be. A lemon has pips, and a yard has ships, and I've got chips. The Signalman by Charles Dickens. "Halloa! Below there!" When he heard a voice thus calling to him, the signalman was standing at the door of his box with a flag in his hand furled round its short pole. "Is there any path by which I can come down and speak to you?" I repeated my inquiry. After a pause, during which he seemed to regard me with fixed attention, he motioned with his rolled-up flag towards a point on my level. There, by dint of looking closely about me, I found a rough, zigzag, descending path, which I followed. Drawing nearer to him, I saw that he was a dark, sallow man, with a dark beard and rather heavy eyebrows. His post was in as solitary and dismal a place as ever I saw. So little sunlight ever found its way to this spot that it had an earthy, deadly smell, and so much cold wind rushed through it that it struck chill to me, as if I had left the natural world. There was something in the man that daunted me. He directed a most curious look towards the red light near the tunnel's mouth, and looked all about it as if something were missing from it, and then looked at me. The monstrous thought came into my mind, as I perused the fixed eyes and the saturnine face, that this was a spirit, not a man. "You look at me," I said, forcing a smile, "as if you had a dread of me." "I was doubtful," he returned, "whether I'd seen you before." "Where?" He pointed to the red light he had looked at. "There?" I said. Intently watchful of me, he replied, but without sound, "Yes." "My good fellow, what should I do there? I never was there, you may swear." "I think I may," he rejoined. "Yes, I'm sure I may." His manner cleared, like my own. He replied to my remarks with readiness. Had he much to do there? Yes. That was to say, he had enough responsibility to bear, but exactness and watchfulness were what was required of him, and of actual work, manual labour, he had next to none. He took me into his box, where there was a fire, a desk for an official book in which he had to make certain entries, a telegraphic instrument with its dial, face, and needles. All that I have here condensed, he said in a quiet manner. Once he had to stand without the door and display a flag as a train passed and make some verbal communication to the driver. In the discharge of his duties, I observed him to be remarkably exact and vigilant, breaking off his discourse at a syllable and remaining silent until what he had to do was done. Said I, when I rose to leave him, "You almost make me think that I have met with a contented man. I believe I used to be so. But I am troubled, sir. I am troubled." "With what? What is your trouble?" "It's very difficult to impart, sir. It is very, very difficult to speak of. If ever you make me another visit, I will try to tell you." "But I expressly intend to make you another visit. Say, when shall it be?" "I go off early in the morning, and I shall be on again at 10 tomorrow night, sir." "I will come at 11. He thanked me, and went out at the door with me. "And when you come down tomorrow night, don't call out. Let me ask you a parting question. What made you cry, 'Hello, below there,' tonight?" "Heaven knows," said I. "I cried something to that effect." "Not to that effect, sir. Those were the very words. I know them well." "No doubt because I saw you below." "For no other reason." "What other reason could I possibly have?" "You had no feeling that they were conveyed to you in any supernatural way?" "No." He wished me good night. I walked by the side of the down line of rails until I found the path. Next night, punctual to my appointment, I placed my foot on the first notch of the zigzag as the distant clocks were striking 11. He was waiting for me with his white light on. "I've not called out," I said when we came close together. "May I speak now?" "By all means, sir." "Good night, then, and here's my hand." "Good night, sir, and here's mine." With that, we walked side by side to his box, entered it, closed the door, and sat down by the fire. "I've made up my mind, sir, that you shall not have to ask me twice what troubles me. I took you for someone else yesterday evening. That troubles me." "The mistake?" "No, that someone else." "Who is it?" "I don't know. I don't know. I never saw the face." "One moonlight night," said the man, "I was sitting here when I heard a voice cry, 'Hello, below there.' I started up, looked from that door, and saw this someone else standing by the red light near the tunnel, waving. The voice seemed hoarse with shouting, and it cried again, 'Hello, below there, look out!' I caught up my lamp and ran towards the figure. It stood just outside the blackness of the tunnel. I advanced so close upon it that I wondered at its keeping the sleeve across its eyes. I ran right up at it, and had my hand stretched out to pull the sleeve away when it was gone." "Into the tunnel?" said I. "No, I ran on into the tunnel, and I looked all round the red light with my own red light, and I went up the iron ladder to the gallery atop of it, and I came down again and ran back here. I telegraphed both ways. 'An alarm has been given. Is anything wrong?' The answer came back, 'Both ways. All well.'" Resisting the slow touch of a frozen finger tracing out my spine, I showed him how that this figure must be a deception of his sense of sight. That was all very well, he returned, but he begged to remark that he had not finished, and he slowly added, "Within 6 hours, the memorable accident on this line happened, and within 10 hours the dead and wounded were brought along through the tunnel over the spot where the figure had stood." A disagreeable shudder crept over me, but I did my best against it. It was not to be denied. I rejoined that this was a remarkable coincidence. "This," he said, "was just a year ago. 6 or 7 months passed, when one morning as the day was breaking, standing at the door, I looked towards the red light, and saw the spectre again." "Did it cry out?" "No, it was silent." "Did you go up to it?" "I came in and sat down, partly to collect my thoughts, partly because it had turned me faint. When I went to the door again, daylight was above me and the ghost was gone." "But nothing followed?" "That very day, as a train came out of the tunnel, I noticed at a carriage window a confusion of hands and heads, and something waved. I ran after it, and as I went along heard terrible screams and cries. A beautiful young lady had died instantaneously in one of the compartments, and was brought in here and laid down on this floor between us. True, sir, True. Precisely as it happened, so I tell it you. I could think of nothing to say to any purpose, and my mouth was very dry. He resumed. Now, sir, mark this, and judge how my mind is troubled. The spectre came back a week ago. Ever since, it has been there now and again by fits and starts. At the light? At the danger light. What does it seem to do? He repeated, if possible, with increased passion and vehemence, that former gesticulation of, for God's sake, clear the way. It calls to me, for many minutes together, in an agonized manner. Below there, look out, look out! It stands waving to me. By this time you will fully understand, sir, he said, that what troubles me so dreadfully is the question, what does the spectre mean? What is its warning against? He said. What is the danger? Where is the danger? There is danger overhanging somewhere on the line. Some dreadful calamity will happen. It is not to be doubted after what has gone before. What can I do? If I telegraph danger on either side of me, I can give no reason for it. They would think I was mad. This is the way it would work. Message. Danger. Take care. Answer. What danger? Where? Message. Don't know, but for God's sake, take care. They would displace me. What else could they do? His pain of mind was most pitiable to see. It was the mental torture of a conscientious man oppressed beyond endurance. I offered to stay through the night, but he would not hear of it. Next evening was a lovely evening, and I walked out early to enjoy it. The sun was not yet quite down when I traversed the field path near the top of the deep cutting. I looked down from the point from which I had first seen him. I cannot describe the thrill that seized upon me when, close at the mouth of the tunnel, I saw the appearance of a man with his left sleeve across his eyes, passionately waving his right arm. The nameless horror that oppressed me passed in a moment, for I saw that this appearance of a man was a man indeed, and that there was a little group of other men standing at a short distance to whom he seemed to be rehearsing the gesture he made. With an irresistible sense that something was wrong, I descended the notched path with all the speed I could make. "What is the matter?" I asked the men. "Signalman, killed this morning, sir." "Not the man belonging to that box?" "Yes, sir." "Not the man I know?" "You will recognize him, sir, if you knew him," said the man who spoke for the others, solemnly uncovering his own head and raising an end of the tarpaulin, "for his face is quite composed." "Oh, how did this happen? How did this happen?" I asked, turning from one to another. "He was cut down by an engine, sir. He'd struck the light and had the lamp in his hand. As the engine came out of the tunnel, his back was towards her, and she cut him down. Show the gentleman, Tom." The man stepped back to his former place at the mouth of the tunnel. "Coming round the curve in the tunnel, sir," he said. "I saw him at the opening. There was no time to check speed, and I knew him to be very careful. As he didn't seem to take heed of the whistle, I shut it off when we were running down upon him and called to him as loud as I could call." "What did you say?" "I said, 'Below there! Look out! Look out! For God's sake, clear the way!'" I started. I never left off calling to him. I put this arm before my eyes not to see, and I waved this arm to the last. But it was no use. A Madman's Manuscript by Charles Dickens. Yes, a madman's. How that word would have struck to my heart many years ago. I like it now, though. It's a fine name. It's a grand thing to be mad. to be peeped at like a wild lion through the iron bars, to gnash one's teeth and howl to the merry ring of a heavy chain, and to roll among the straw. Hurrah for the madhouse! Oh, it's a rare place. I remember days when I was afraid of being mad, when I used to start from my sleep and pray to be spared from the curse of my race. I knew that madness was mixed with my blood, and that one generation had passed away without the pestilence appearing among them, and that I was the first in whom it would revive. At last it came upon me, and I wondered how I could ever have feared it. I could go into the world now and laugh and shout with the best among them. I knew I was mad, but they did not even suspect it. And how I used to laugh for joy when I was alone, and thought how well I kept my secret, and how quickly my kind friends would have fallen from me if they had known the truth. I could have screamed with ecstasy when I dined alone with some fine roaring fellow, to think how pale he would have turned if he had known that the dear friend who sat close to him, sharpening a bright glittering knife, was a madman with all the power and half the will to plunge it in his heart. Oh, it was a merry life. Riches became mine. Wealth poured in upon me, and I rioted in pleasures enhanced 1,000-fold to me by the consciousness of my well-kept secret. I inherited an estate. Where was the wit of the sharp-sighted men of sound mind? Where the dexterity of the lawyers, eager to discover a flaw? The madman's cunning had overreached them all. I had money. How I was courted! I spent it profusely. How I was praised! How those 3 proud, overbearing brothers humbled themselves before me! The old white-headed father, too, such deference, such respect, such devoted friendship. He worshipped me. The old man had a daughter, and the young men a sister, and all the 5 were poor. I was rich, and when I married the girl, I saw a smile of triumph play upon the faces of her needy relatives as they thought of their well-planned scheme and their fine prize. It was for me to smile. They little thought they had married her to a madman. In one thing I was deceived with all my cunning. If I had not been mad, for though we madmen are sharp-witted enough, we get bewildered sometimes, I should have known that the girl would rather have been placed stiff and cold in a dull leaden coffin than borne an envied bride to my rich glittering house. I should have known that her heart was with the dark-eyed boy, whose name I once heard her breathe in her troubled sleep, and that she had been sacrificed to me to relieve the poverty of the old white-headed man and the haughty brothers. I know the girl was beautiful. I know she was. For when I start up from my sleep, and all is quiet about me, I see, standing still and motionless in one corner of this cell, a slight and wasted figure, with long black hair and eyes that fix their gaze on me. That figure never moves. It never frowns and mouths as others do, but it is much more dreadful to me. For nearly a year, I saw that face grow paler. I saw the tears steal down the mournful cheeks and never knew the cause. I found it out at last, though. She had never liked me. I had never thought she did. She despised my wealth and hated the splendour in which she lived, but I had not expected that she loved another. This I had never thought of. I did not hate her, though I hated the boy she still wept for. I pitied the wretched life to which her relations had doomed her, but the thought that before her death she might give birth to some ill-fated being, destined to hand down madness to its offspring, determined me. I resolved to kill her. Oh, the pleasure of stropping the razor day after day, feeling the sharp edge and thinking of the gash one stroke of its thin, bright edge would make. At last the old spirits, who had been with me so often before, whispered in my ear that the time was come, and thrust the open razor into my hand. I grasped it firmly, rose from the bed, and leaned over my sleeping wife. Her face was buried in her hands. I withdrew them softly, and they fell listlessly on her bosom. She had been weeping, for the traces of the tears were still wet upon her cheek. I leaned forward again. She screamed and woke. One motion of my hand, and she would never again have uttered cry or sound. But I was startled, and drew back. Her eyes were fixed on mine, and I quailed beneath them. She rose from the bed, still gazing fixedly and steadily on me. I trembled. The razor was in my hand, but I could not move. She made towards the door. As she neared it, she turned and withdrew her eyes from my face. The spell was broken. I bounded forward and clutched her by the arm, uttering shriek upon shriek. She sank upon the ground. I could have killed her without a struggle, but the house was alarmed. I heard the tread of footsteps on the stairs. I replaced the razor in its usual drawer, unfastened the door, and called loudly for assistance. They came, and raised her and placed her on the bed. She lay bereft of animation for hours, and when life returned, her senses had deserted her. Doctors rolled up to my door in easy carriages, with fine horses and gaudy servants, who were at her bedside for weeks, consulting together in low and solemn voices. One, the cleverest and most celebrated, took me aside, and bidding me prepare for the worst, told me, the madman, that my wife was mad. I laughed till the air resounded with my shouts. The white-headed old man followed her to the grave, and the proud brothers dropped a tear over the insensible corpse of her whose sufferings they had regarded in her lifetime with muscles of iron. All this was food for my secret mirth, and I laughed behind the white handkerchief which I held up to my face as we rode home, till the tears came into my eyes. But I was restless and disturbed, and I felt that before long my secret must be known. Yet I ground my teeth and drove my sharp nails into my hands. I kept it down, and no one knew I was a madman yet. I remember, though it's one of the last things I can remember, how I let it out at last. Let me see. Yes, I had been out. It was late at night when I reached home, and found the proudest of the three proud brothers waiting to see me. Urgent business, I was told. I hated that man with all a madman's hate. Many a time had my fingers longed to tear him. I ran swiftly upstairs. It was late, and we were alone together for the first time. We sat in silence for a few minutes. He spoke at last. My recent dissipation and strange remarks, made so soon after his sister's death, were an insult to her memory. He thought I had not treated her well. He wished to know whether he was right in inferring that I meant to cast a reproach upon her memory and a disrespect upon her family. It was due to the uniform he wore to demand this explanation. This man had a commission in the army, a commission purchased with my money and his sister's misery. This was the man who had been foremost in the plot to ensnare me and grasp my wealth. This was the man who had been the main instrument in forcing his sister to wed me, well knowing that her heart was given to that pulling boy. Due to his uniform, the livery of his degradation. I turned my eyes upon him. I could not help it, but I spoke not a word. I saw the sudden change that came upon him beneath my gaze. He was a bold man, but the colour faded from his face, and he drew back his chair. I dragged mine nearer to him, and I laughed. I was very merry then. I saw him shudder. I felt the madness rising within me. He was afraid of me. "You villain," said I found you out. I discovered your hellish plots against me. I know her heart was fixed on someone else before you compelled her to marry me. I know it. He jumped suddenly from his chair, brandished it aloft, and bid me stand back. for I took care to be getting closer to him all the time I spoke. I screamed rather than talked, for I felt tumultuous passions eddying through my veins, and the old spirits whispering and taunting me to tear his heart out. "Damn you," said I, starting up and rushing upon him. "I killed her. I am a madman. Down with you, blood! Blood! I will have it!" I turned aside with one blow the chair he hurled at me in his terror, and closed with him, and with a heavy crash we rolled upon the floor together. It was a fine struggle, that, for he was a tall, strong man fighting for his life, and I, a powerful madman thirsting to destroy him. I knew no strength could equal mine, and I was right. Right again, though a madman. His struggles grew fainter. I knelt upon his chest and clasped his brawny throat firmly with both hands. His face grew purple, his eyes were starting from his head, and with protruded tongue he seemed to mock me. I squeezed the tighter. The door was suddenly burst open with a loud noise, and a crowd of people rushed forward, crying aloud to each other to secure the madman. My secret was out, and my only struggle now was for liberty and freedom. I gained my feet before a hand was on me, and cleared my way with my strong arm as if I bore a hatchet in my hand, and hewed them down before me. I gained the door, dropped over the banisters, and in an instant was in the street. Straight and swift I ran, and no one dared to stop me. I heard the noise of the feet behind, and redoubled my speed. It grew fainter and fainter in the distance, and at length died away altogether. I was borne upon the arms of demons, who swept along upon the wind, and bore down bank and hedge before them, until at last they threw me from them with a violent shock, and I fell heavily upon the earth. When I woke, I found myself here in this grey cell, where the sunlight seldom comes, and the moon steals in, which only serves to show that silent figure in its old corner, for from the first shades of dusk till the earliest light of morning, she still stands motionless in the same place, listening to the music of my iron chain, and watching my gambols on my straw bed. The Queer Chair by Charles Dickens. One winter's evening, just as it began to grow dusk, a man in a gig might have been seen urging his tired horse along the road which leads across Marlborough Downs. The weather was so bad that nothing was out but mud and water. "Cheer up, old girl," said Tom. "The first house we come to we'll put up at, so the faster you go, the sooner it's over. So-ho, old girl, gently, gently." Tom had no sooner finished speaking than she started forward at a speed which made the clay-coloured gig rattle until she drew up of her own accord before a roadside inn about 1/4 of a mile from the end of the downs. In less than 5 minutes, Tom was ensconced in the room opposite the bar, before a substantial, matter-of-fact, roaring fire. But this was not all, for in the bar, seated at the nicest possible little table, drawn close up before the brightest possible little fire, was a buxom widow of somewhere about 48 or thereabouts, with a face as comfortable as the bar, landlady and supreme ruler over all these agreeable possessions. There was only one drawback to the beauty of the whole picture, and that was a tall man in a brown coat and bright basket buttons, and black whiskers and wavy black hair, who was seated at tea with the widow, and who, it required no great penetration to discover, was in a fair way of persuading her to be a widow no longer. Tom Smart was by no means of an envious disposition, but somehow or other the tall man did rouse what little gall he had, and did make him feel that the tall man was as high in the widow's favour as he was in size. Tom was fond of hot punch. I may venture to say he was very fond of hot punch, and it had been long his ambition to stand in a bar of his own, just like this, in a green coat, knee cords and tops, and he felt very justly and properly indignant that the tall man should be in a fair way of keeping such an excellent house, while he, Tom Smart, was as far off from it as ever. So, after deliberating over the 2 last tumblers, Tom Smart at last arrived at the satisfactory conclusion that he was a very ill-used and persecuted individual, and had better go to bed. It was a good large room, with big closets and a couple of oaken presses that would have held the baggage of a small army. But what struck Tom's fancy most was a strange, grim-looking, high-backed chair, carved in the most fantastic manner, with a flowered damask cushion and round knobs at the bottom of the legs carefully tied up in red cloth. "Well," said Tom, "I never saw such a rum concern as that in my days," and looked at the chair again. He couldn't make anything of it, though, so he got into bed and fell asleep. In about half an hour, Tom woke up with a start from a confused dream of tall men and tumblers of punch, and the first object that presented itself to his waking imagination was the queer chair, and, suddenly, as he looked at it, a most extraordinary change seemed to come over it. The carving of the back gradually assumed the lineaments and expression of an old, shrivelled human face. The damask cushion became an antique flapped waistcoat. The round knobs grew into a couple of feet encased in red cloth slippers, and the whole chair looked like a very ugly old man with his arms akimbo. Tom sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes to dispel the illusion. No, the chair was an ugly old gentleman, and what was more, he was winking. He began to grow rather indignant when he saw the old gentleman winking and leering at him, and at length he resolved that he wouldn't stand it, and said in a very angry tone, "What the devil are you winking at me for?" "Because I like it, Tom Smart," said the chair. "How do you know my name, old nutcracker face?" inquired Tom Smart. "I know everything about you, Tom. Everything. You're very poor, Tom." "I certainly am," said Tom Smart. "But how came you to know that?" "Never mind that. You're much too fond of punch." Tom blushed and was silent. "The widow's a fine woman. Remarkably fine woman, eh, Tom? And I am her guardian." "Are you?" inquired Tom Smart. "I knew her mother and her grandmother. She was very fond of me. Made me this waistcoat. I want you to marry the widow." "Me, sir?" said Tom. "You," said the old gentleman. "Bless your reverend locks, she wouldn't have me," and Tom sighed involuntarily as he thought of the bar. "Wouldn't she?" said the old gentleman firmly. "No, no," said Tom. "There's somebody else in the wind, a tall man with black whiskers." "She will never have him." "Well, if you stood in the bar, you'd tell another story." "Pooh, pooh," said the old gentleman. "I know all about that." "About what?" said Tom. "The kissing behind the door and all that sort of thing. However, Tom, I'm wandering from the point. This man is a rascally adventurer. The moment he married the widow, he would sell off all the furniture and run away. She would be deserted and reduced to ruin, and I should catch my death of cold in some broker's shop." "Well, yes, but—" "Don't interrupt me. Of you, Tom, I entertain a very different opinion, for I well know that if you once settled yourself in a public house, You would never leave it. Therefore you shall have her, and he shall not. Well, what is to prevent it? Said Tom Smart. He is already married. Oh, how can I prove it? The old gentleman untucked his arm from his side and pointed to one of the oaken presses. He little thinks that in the right-hand pocket of a pair of trousers in that press he has left a letter entreating him to return to his disconsolate wife with 6 babes, and all of them small ones. As the old gentleman solemnly uttered these words, his features grew less and less distinct, and his figure more shadowy. The light faded gently away, and Tom Smart fell back on his pillow and dropped asleep. Morning aroused Tom from the lethargic slumber into which he had fallen on the disappearance of the old man. "How are you, old boy?" The chair remained motionless. "Which press did you point to? You can tell me that," said Tom. The old man would not be drawn into conversation. "It's not much trouble to open it, anyhow," said Tom, getting out of bed very deliberately. He walked up to one of the presses. The key was in the lock. He turned it, and there was a pair of trousers. He put his hand into the pocket and drew forth the identical letter the old gentleman had described. "Queer sort of thing, this," said Tom Smart. "Very queer." But as there was nothing in either to lessen the queerness, he thought he might as well dress himself and settle the tall man's business at once, just to put him out of his misery. "Good morning, ma'am," said Tom Smart, closing the door of the little parlour as the widow entered. "Good morning, sir," said the widow. "What will you take for breakfast, sir? There's a very nice ham and a beautiful cold larded fowl." These words roused Tom from his reflections. Thoughtful creature! Comfortable provider! "Who is that gentleman in the bar, ma'am?" inquired Tom. "His name is Dickens, sir," said the widow, slightly blushing. "He's a tall man," said Tom. "He's a very fine man, sir, and a very nice gentleman." "Ah," said Tom. "Is there anything more you want, sir?" inquired the widow, rather puzzled by Tom's manner. "Why, yes," said Tom. "My dear ma'am, will you have the kindness to sit down for one moment?" The widow looked much amazed, but she sat down, and Tom sat down too, close beside her. Somehow or other, the palm of Tom's hand fell upon the back of the widow's hand, and remained there while he spoke. "My dear ma'am, you deserve a very excellent husband. You do indeed." "Lor, sir," said the widow, as well she might. "I scorn to flatter, but you deserve a very admirable husband, and whoever he is, he'll be a very lucky man." "I'm sure I'm very much obliged to you, sir, for your good opinion," said the buxom landlady, half laughing. "And if I ever marry again—" "If? Well," said the widow, laughing outright, "when I do, I hope I shall have as good a husband as you describe." "Jenkins to wit," said Tom. "Lor, sir!" exclaimed the widow. "Oh, don't tell me," said Tom. "I know him." "I am sure nobody who knows him knows anything bad of him," said the widow, bridling up at the mysterious air with which Tom had spoken. "Him!" said Tom Smart. The widow inquired whether Tom thought it gentlemanly to take away the character of another gentleman behind his back. "I'll say it to him fast enough," said Tom, "only I want you to hear it first." "What is it?" "I'll astonish you," said Tom, putting his hand in his pocket. "Well, if it's that he wants money, I know that already, and you needn't trouble yourself." "Pooh! Nonsense! That's nothing," said Tom Smart. "Oh dear, what can it be?" exclaimed the poor widow. "Don't be frightened. You won't scream." No, no, let me see it." He placed the letter in the widow's hand. The widow rocked herself to and fro, and wrung her hands. "Oh, the deception and villainy of the man!" "Frightful, my dear ma'am, but compose yourself," said Tom Smart. "Oh, I can't compose myself," shrieked the widow. "I shall never find anyone else I can love so much." "Oh, yes, you will, my dear soul," said Tom Smart, letting fall a shower of the largest-sized tears in pity for the widow's misfortunes. In the energy of his compassion, he had put his arm round the widow's waist, and the widow, in a passion of grief, had clasped Tom's hand. She looked up in Tom's face and smiled through her tears. Tom looked down in hers and smiled through his.
This world is endless, so wide, so far, but somehow I'm still lost in you. The streets are full of moving shadows, countless places I could go. City shining, people passing, yet I still feel so alone. Every road keeps leading nowhere, every sky feels cold and blue. In this world so vast and open, I'm still lost in missing you. The world is wide, so wide before me, but I keep losing my way. Somewhere in the endless distance, your memory makes me stay. For no matter where these feet may wander, I'm still lost in missing you. I have tried to outrun silence, tried to leave your ghost behind, but your name still echoes softly through the corners of my mind. The world is wide, so wide before me, but I keep losing my way. Somewhere in the endless distance, your memory makes me stay. But my heart remains untrue. For no matter where these feet may wander, I'm still lost in missing you. Maybe someday I'll stop searching for your face in every crowd, but until that day, this broken heart will keep calling your name out. The world is wide, so wide before me, but I keep losing my way.